Daniel Carter had always preferred the quiet life. After leaving his job as an astronomer, he moved to a small cabin deep in the forest. No internet, no neighbors, just the sound of the wind in the trees and the stars above. He told himself he didn't miss the city, the noise, or the people. But sometimes, when the nights were too quiet, he wondered if he had made the right choice. That evening, the sky was clear, filled with thousands of stars. Daniel sat outside, sipping coffee and watching the constellations. He had spent years studying the universe, yet he still felt a sense of wonder whenever he looked up. He adjusted his telescope and scanned the sky, searching for anything unusual. But tonight, something strange wasn't in the sky. It was in the forest. A faint glow appeared between the trees. At first, Daniel thought it was a trick of the light, maybe fireflies, or the reflection of the moon. But the glow didn't flicker or move like an insect. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. Curious, he set his coffee down and stood up. The glow seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods, not too far from his cabin. He hesitated. He wasn't afraid. He had lived here for years and knew every path, every hidden stream. But something about this light felt different. Grabbing a flashlight, he stepped forward, his boots crunching on dry leaves. The glow didn't fade as he got closer. In fact, it seemed to grow stronger, as if calling him. His heart beat faster, though he couldn't explain why. Then he saw her. Standing in the middle of a small clearing was a girl. No, not a girl. Something else. She was tall and slender, her skin shimmering with an otherworldly silver hue. Her hair, long and flowing, seemed to glow faintly, reflecting the soft light around her. But it was her eyes that caught Daniel's breath. They were large, luminous, and filled with a depth he couldn't comprehend. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel's mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. She wasn't human. That much was clear. But she also wasn't frightening. There was no sign of aggression in her posture, no threat in her gaze, only curiosity. Slowly, Daniel raised a hand, as if to wave. The girl's eyes widened slightly, and she took a small step backward. He stopped, not wanting to scare her. "Hello," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The instant the word left his lips, the girl vanished. Not ran, not disappeared behind a tree. She simply blinked out of existence, as if she had never been there at all. Daniel stood frozen, staring at the empty clearing. His flashlight beam revealed nothing, just grass and trees swaying in the breeze. The glow was gone. The girl was gone. He swallowed hard, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Had he imagined it? No, it was too real. His skin still tingled from the moment their eyes met. He wasn't crazy. He knew what he had seen. Turning in slow circles, he searched for any sign of her. Footprints, broken branches, anything. But the ground was undisturbed. No proof that anyone had stood there just seconds ago. His hands clenched into fists. He wasn't about to let this go. If she was real, then there had to be an explanation, and he was going to find it. Daniel took one last look at the clearing before heading back to his cabin. The night had suddenly become much more interesting, and somehow, deep in his gut, he knew this was just the beginning. Daniel Carter couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the wooden ceiling of his cabin, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. The girl, if she was even a girl, had vanished the second their eyes met. Not ran, not hid, just disappeared. Had he imagined her? Was his mind playing tricks on him? No, he knew what he had seen. It was real. By morning, Daniel had made up his mind. He had to find proof. He needed something, anything, to show that he wasn't going crazy. Throwing on a jacket, he grabbed his backpack and set off into the woods. The forest was calm, sunlight filtering through the tall trees, birds chirping in the distance. It was the same peaceful place he had known for years. But now it felt different, like something was watching. Reaching the small clearing where he had seen the girl, he stopped. The air was still. Everything looked exactly the same as it had the night before. Except now, there was no glow, no mysterious presence. But he wouldn't give up that easily. Daniel crouched down, scanning the ground for footprints. If she had been standing here, there had to be tracks. But the earth was undisturbed. No footprints, no broken grass. It was as if she had never existed. His frustration grew. He knew she had been here. There had to be some kind of evidence. Then something caught his eye. On the trunk of a nearby tree, faint but unmistakable, were symbols. Daniel stepped closer, running his fingers over the markings. They weren't carved or scratched. Instead, they looked burned into the bark, thin glowing lines forming intricate patterns. They reminded him of star maps, something only a highly intelligent mind could create. His heart pounded. This was not natural. This was proof. But who, or what, had left it? His mind raced with possibilities. Was it a language? A message? Had the girl left this behind? Or was someone else watching? Determined to understand, Daniel pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. He wasn't sure what he would do with it yet, but he needed to record everything. As he turned to leave, something made him stop. The air had changed. The peaceful hum of the forest had gone silent. No birds, no rustling leaves. Nothing. A chill ran down his spine. He had spent years in these woods, and he had never felt anything like this before. It was as if the world was holding its breath. Then, from the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement. Daniel spun around, heart racing. For a split second, he saw her, the alien girl. She stood at the edge of the trees, half hidden behind a thick trunk, watching him. Her glowing silver eyes locked onto his, full of curiosity. And something else. Fear. Daniel took a slow step forward. "Wait," he said softly. She shook her head. And then, just like before, she vanished. Gone. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This was real. She was real. And she was afraid of being seen. But why? As he stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been, one thing became clear. She was trying to tell him something. And he wasn't going to stop until he figured out what it was. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she appeared and disappeared like a ghost. The way her silver eyes had locked onto his, full of mystery and something else. Fear. Why was she afraid? Why was she hiding? That night, he sat at his desk, staring at the picture he had taken of the strange markings on the tree. The symbols glowed faintly, like they were alive. He traced them with his finger on the screen, wondering what they meant. A message. A warning. Daniel sighed and leaned back in his chair. His cabin was quiet. The only sound was the soft creaking of the wooden walls. Outside, the forest was calm. No wind, no rustling leaves. It reminded him of the eerie silence from earlier. He glanced at the clock. 2:37 a.m. Maybe he should sleep. His mind was exhausted from all the unanswered questions. But just as he stood up, a strange feeling washed over him. He wasn't alone. A shiver ran down his spine. The air in the cabin felt heavier, like someone was watching him. Slowly, he turned around. And there, standing just outside his window, was her. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. She was barely visible in the darkness, her silver eyes glowing softly, her shimmering skin blending with the shadows. She wasn't running this time. She was watching him, studying him. He didn't move, afraid that if he did, she would vanish again. The seconds stretched. The silence between them felt electric, charged with unspoken words. Then, slowly, she raised her hand. Not a wave, not a threat, just a simple movement, like a question, like she was asking if he understood. Daniel didn't know what to do. His heart pounded, his mind screaming with questions. But deep inside, he felt an instinct. This was a test. Carefully, he raised his own hand in return, mirroring her gesture. For the first time, she didn't disappear. Instead, something incredible happened. The air around her shimmered like ripples on a pond. The space between them seemed to bend, the edges of her form flickering like a mirage. And then, just for a second, he felt something in his mind. A voice. A whisper. Not in words, but in feelings. Curiosity. Caution. Hope. Daniel's breath hitched. It wasn't like hearing someone speak. It was like feeling an emotion that wasn't his own. He took a step forward, drawn to the impossible connection. But the moment his foot touched the wooden floor, she was gone. The night returned to silence. The air felt normal again. Daniel let out a slow breath, his heart racing. She was trying to communicate. And for a brief moment, she had. The next morning, Daniel woke up with a purpose. Last night wasn't a dream. She was real. And she was trying to reach out. He grabbed his notebook and started writing down everything, every detail of her appearance, the feeling of the silent connection, the symbols on the tree. He wasn't going to let any of it slip away. Then he had an idea. She was clearly drawn to his cabin, but she never stayed long. Maybe she was afraid. Maybe she didn't trust him yet. So he decided to send her a message. Taking a piece of paper, he carefully drew a simple star map, the same one he had been looking at through his telescope the night before they met. It was a universal language, something that went beyond words. He placed the paper on the windowsill, where she had stood the night before. And then he waited. The day passed slowly. Hours of silence. No sign of her. But when night fell, Daniel felt it again. That strange, electric feeling in the air. He turned to the window. His heart skipped a beat. The paper was gone, and in its place, carefully drawn on the wooden frame, was a new constellation, a star map he had never seen before. Daniel stared, excitement rushing through him. She had answered, and she wanted him to follow. Daniel worked quickly, his hands moving with a sense of urgency he hadn't felt in years. The small device Elara had given him lay on his cabin table, its smooth surface pulsing with a faint blue glow. She had explained in her own way, through gestures and brief glimpses into his mind, that this was her only way home, but it was broken, damaged when she first arrived. And now, time was running out. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but it wasn't a normal wind. The sky above the forest flickered with strange, shifting colors, as if reality itself was unstable. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, twisting unnaturally, and the air had a heavy charge, like the atmosphere before a storm. Elara stood by the window, her silver eyes scanning the sky. Her normally calm expression was tense. She turned to Daniel and pointed at the device. "Hurry." Daniel swallowed hard. He was no engineer, but his background in astronomy had given him enough knowledge to understand the basics of electromagnetic fields and quantum resonance. And this device, whatever it was, seemed to operate on principles far beyond human technology. He carefully adjusted the exposed circuits, using the tools he had. "This might take some time," he said. "I don't even know if I'm doing it right." Eliara stepped closer. She placed her hand above the device, and suddenly, Daniel's mind filled with images, blueprints, energy waves, the flow of power within the device. She was showing him how it worked. Daniel gasped, gripping the edge of the table as his brain tried to process the impossible information flooding into him. The technology was beyond anything humans had ever created, more advanced than even the most futuristic theories he had studied. But somehow, through her connection, he understood. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he made the final adjustments. The blue glow of the device flickered, then steadied. A soft hum filled the cabin. Eliara's eyes widened. It was working. But before either of them could react, a deafening crack split through the sky. The air tore open outside the cabin, a swirling rift of darkness and violet lightning. From within, shadowy figures began to emerge, tall, twisted beings with elongated limbs and glowing red eyes. Iliara took a sharp step back, her glowing skin flickering with fear. She turned to Daniel, and he didn't need telepathy to understand. They had found her. Daniel's pulse pounded. These creatures, whatever they were, had been hunting her. And now, they had come through the rift. Iliara grabbed his wrist and pointed at the device. It wasn't ready yet. They needed more time. Outside, the creatures moved closer. Their forms shifted, never fully solid, like they existed in multiple realities at once. Their bodies crackled with energy, and when one of them stepped on a fallen branch, the wood instantly turned to dust. Daniel's mind screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to think. The device was still stabilizing. He had to buy them a few more minutes. Grabbing a metal rod from his toolbox, he ran to the door and slammed it against the frame, creating a loud, echoing noise. The creatures twitched, their red eyes snapping toward him. "Yeah, that's right," Daniel muttered. "Look at me." One of the creatures lunged, but the moment it stepped onto the wooden porch, it hesitated. Its body flickered, struggling against the solid material of the cabin. Daniel's eyes widened. The cabin was interfering with them. Maybe because it was built of natural materials. Maybe because of the electromagnetic field in the area. Whatever the reason, it slowed them down. He turned to Iliara. "We can use this." She nodded, understanding immediately. Raising her hands, she focused, and the energy around the cabin intensified. The wooden walls glowed faintly, and the flickering forms of the creatures grew unstable. But the rift was growing larger. More of them were coming. Daniel turned back to the device. The blue glow had become a steady pulse. It was almost there, almost ready. A sudden crash. One of the creatures forced itself through the barrier, its clawed hand stretching toward them. Iliara cried out, her energy surging as she pushed back against it. Daniel made a final, desperate adjustment on the device, and suddenly, the glow turned into a blinding flash of light. The air rippled, and the creatures let out a screech as their bodies distorted. The rift trembled, its edges curling inward. It was working. But Daniel could feel the pull now. The energy was affecting everything, including him. His vision blurred. His body felt weightless, as if he were being dragged into the rift along with them. Iliara turned to him, her silver eyes filled with something he had never seen before. Desperation. She reached out, and everything went white. A ringing silence filled the air. For a moment, Daniel felt weightless, as if he were floating in an endless void. His vision was nothing but white light, stretching in every direction. He couldn't tell if he was falling or rising. His body didn't respond, his mind felt disconnected, and time itself seemed meaningless. Then, a voice. Not spoken, not heard. Felt. A whisper, not in words, but in emotion. Regret. Urgency. Hope. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the world snapped back into focus. Daniel gasped, stumbling as the bright light faded. His feet hit solid ground, and his surroundings rushed back. But everything was different. He wasn't in his cabin anymore. The sky above was deep violet, streaked with swirling silver clouds. A vast, unfamiliar landscape stretched before him, filled with towering crystalline structures and floating islands. The air shimmered, filled with energy he could feel in his bones. He wasn't on Earth. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he turned, searching for her. Iliara stood a few feet away, her glowing silver eyes filled with relief. She was different here, brighter, her form more solid, as if this was where she truly belonged. He had followed her home. Where? Daniel swallowed. Where are we? Iliara didn't speak, but again he felt her response. A vision filled his mind. A world at the edge of existence, a place hidden between dimensions, where time and space didn't follow the same rules. Her world. But it was broken. The land around them was crumbling, the floating islands shifting unpredictably, pieces of crystal structures dissolving into dust. The very air hummed with instability. And then Daniel saw them. The creatures. Not many, but a few remained, struggling, flickering in and out of existence. The device had forced most of them back into the rift, but some had survived. And they were angry. Illyra's glowing skin dimmed slightly, her body tense as she faced them. These creatures weren't just hunting her, they had destroyed her world. And now, they would destroy him too. Daniel clenched his fists, his mind racing. He was just a human. No weapons, no special powers. What could he possibly do against beings that defied reality itself? But Illyra turned to him and placed a hand on his chest. And suddenly, he understood. He wasn't powerless. Her energy flowed into him, not overwhelming, but steady, guiding him. He could see the fabric of this world, feel the way it bent and twisted. He wasn't just in another place. He was part of it now. And he could fight back. The first creature lunged. Illyra moved like light itself, dodging effortlessly, her hands glowing with energy as she struck back. The creature screeched, its form distorting. Another rushed toward Daniel. Instinct took over. He didn't think, he just moved. He dodged, his body lighter, faster than ever before. His mind felt connected to this strange energy, and as the creature swiped at him, he reached out. And the very air bent beneath his fingers. A pulse of force slammed into the creature, sending it flying backward. Daniel stared at his hands. He had just done that. No time to question it. Another creature advanced. But now he knew what to do. Illyra fought beside him, their movements in sync, their energies merging in a way that felt natural. Together, they turned the tide. One by one, the creatures fell, their forms unable to hold in this unstable world. Until finally, only one remained. The largest, the strongest, the one that had led the hunt. It let out a deep, otherworldly growl, its red eyes locking onto Illyra. It hated her. Daniel saw the way her glow flickered. She was tired. She had been running for so long, fighting for so long. But she wasn't alone anymore. Daniel stepped forward. The energy of this place coursed through him, and for the first time, he truly understood it. The creature lunged, and Daniel met it head-on. A final surge of power erupted between them, sending shockwaves across the land. The creature screamed as its body began to break apart, pulled into the very fabric of the collapsing world. And then, silence. The last enemy was gone. Daniel turned to Illyra, breathing hard. She was watching him, her silver eyes filled with something different this time. Gratitude. Trust. But before they could say anything, the ground beneath them shook. This world was dying. Illyra grabbed Daniel's hand and pointed toward the horizon. There, a final portal, flickering weakly. Their only way out. She didn't need to tell them. They had to run. Hand in hand, they raced toward the light. The world behind them cracked and shattered, collapsing into the void. The portal pulsed, shrinking rapidly. They had only seconds. With one final leap, they jumped, and everything went dark. Daniel's eyes snapped open. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. His body felt weightless, suspended in complete darkness. His mind struggled to catch up. Where was he? What had happened? Then, reality rushed back. A sharp gasp escaped his lips as he fell forward, landing hard on solid ground. The feeling of grass beneath his fingers sent a shock through his system. The scent of earth, the cool touch of the wind, it was familiar. He was home. Daniel groaned, pushing himself up. His body ached like he had just run a marathon, but he was alive. He turned his head frantically, searching for her. And then he saw her. Illyra lay beside him, her silver eyes blinking open. For the first time since he had met her, she looked peaceful. No fear, no tension, just quiet relief. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "We made it," he whispered. Iliara sat up slowly, looking around. They were back in the forest, near the clearing where they had first met. The sun was rising, casting golden light through the trees. The world was calm, no strange distortions, no creatures hunting them. It was over. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, letting the silence settle over them. The weight of everything that had happened, everything they had survived, pressed down on them. Finally, Daniel turned to her. "What happens now?" Iliara looked at him, and for the first time she smiled. A small, soft smile, one that felt warm despite the alien glow of her skin. She lifted her hand, and Daniel felt a familiar whisper in his mind. But this time, it was different. There was no urgency, no fear, only gratitude. "Thank you." Daniel chuckled, rubbing the back of his head. "I still don't understand half of what happened." Iliara tilted her head, amusement flashing in her silver eyes. Then she gestured toward the sky. Daniel followed her gaze. The night before, there had been a rift in the sky, a tear in reality. But now the sky was clear. The stars twinkled in their usual places, untouched by the chaos of the past days. The universe had settled, but there was something else, a faint, pulsing light in the distance, a ship hovering beyond the atmosphere, just barely visible. Daniel's breath caught. Her people. They had finally come for her. Iliara stood up slowly. Daniel followed, his chest tightening with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. He should have been relieved. He should have been happy for her. But instead, all he felt was a strange sadness. She had fought so hard to survive. He had fought beside her. And now, she was leaving. Iliara stepped closer, studying him carefully. She had felt his emotions before. He knew she could feel them now. She reached out, placing her hand over his. Warm, steady, reassuring. Then she pulled out something small and familiar. Daniel's breath hitched. It was the device, the one they had fixed together. But now, its glow was different, softer, controlled. It wasn't broken anymore. She pressed it into his hand. Daniel frowned. "But you need this, don't you?" Iliara shook her head gently. And then, another vision filled his mind. Not just a message, a promise. Stars. Endless stars. A vast universe filled with possibilities. A door that had been opened, not closed. Daniel stared at the device in his hand. It wasn't just a machine. It was a key. A key to something bigger than himself. His chest tightened. "You're saying, this isn't the end?" Iliara's smile grew, and she gave him a single nod. Then, before Daniel could say anything else, a beam of light surrounded her. The air shimmered as the ship above sent down its final call. Iliara took a step back. She looked at him one last time, and then she was gone. Daniel stood there for a long time, staring at the sky. The ship pulsed once, twice, before disappearing into the stars. The forest around him was silent again. But Daniel knew, deep in his heart, that his world had changed forever. He looked down at the glowing device in his hand, and for the first time since all of this had started, he smiled. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning.